we apologize that the other governors we anticipated to be involved aren't here today, but we do appreciate you being here for the three most important governors.
Girl.
We'll start with an opening statement from Governor Herbert. He'll be followed by Governor Otter and Governor Mead, and they will offer brief statements, and then we'll open it up to questions. We are on a little bit of a time frame, but I want to give you guys the time you need, so we'll probably shoot for about 20-25 minutes and call it. Okay.
We won't have any questions for that. But,
unless the governor does count.
let me again welcome everybody. We're honored to have you here. This has been a historic day for us here in Utah to have governors join with us here today, Governor Otter and Governor Mead. We also were able to have Governor Sandoval from Nevada join us by telephone as we had our opening get-together here this morning before lunch. Governor Hickenlooper has had some issues to come up with his legislature, and some issues are surrounding the fire that's taking place in Colorado, so he has to be excused. The purpose of us getting together is we all belong to the Western Governors Association. Governor Otter is the past chairman of the Western Governors Association. And as we've talked amongst ourselves, we thought there was a need for us to kind of share ideas, best practices, some of the issues that we have mutual concerns with that are unique to not only the West, but to the Intermountain West. And we have a wide variety of issues, and whether it be the public lands that we have in our backyards that sometimes help us and sometimes hurt us when it comes to economic development, and the challenges we have in our relationships with the federal government. Whether it's energy development, again, Wyoming, a significant producer of energy, the largest producer of BTUs in America, and the unique challenges they face, and some of the same challenges we face here in Utah with our own access to our energy and our natural resources, endangered species issues, transmission of power, transportation, water has been a topic of conversation today. And here in the West, where we live in more arid states, water is really a significant issue for us. And our overall relationship not only with each other and surrounding states that, for me, that touch really on Utah's borders, but also what we need to do to help shape policy in Washington, D.C. I believe as governors, we believe, in fact, that Washington, D.C. needs to get their act together, balancing budgets, getting rid of the nonsensical regulations. And we have kind of a bipartisan irritation about that. And we think that the federal government would do better to watch and emulate what's taking place in the states. And we think we have a role to play as a partner with the Washington, D.C. establishment and see if we can help impact policy and make better policy. So all of those things are what we've talked about. This is not an end result. This is really a beginning. The desire to communicate better as governors with each other and learn from each other, learn from our successes and even our failures, and see if we can become better governors by doing that, and unite our voices in areas that we have common concern. So I can tell you I'm particularly honored to have Governor Otter and Governor Mead here with us, two great governors who are doing a lot of good things in their respective states and are respected across this country for their leadership and what they're doing. So again, we're honored to host it today. If we do this more in the future, it could be found in Idaho, it could be found in Wyoming or Nevada, but we plan to continue to talk to each other and see if we can, in fact, come together on some of these important and significant issues. So with that, I'll turn some time to Governor Otter for a statement, and then Governor Mead.
Well, I think Governor Herbert has pretty well explained what we've done, and I'm not sure I can add a whole lot to that. But I do want to congratulate and thank Gary for his leadership in bringing the Rocky Mountain groups of states together to discuss issues that are Western issues, but are unique, as Gary has said, to the Rocky Mountain region. And certainly water, energy, not only the production of, but the transmission of energy. The public lands, which present problems for both water and energy management. But one of the things that I think I worked hardest on when I was chairman of the Western Governors Association was to have more input into the decision-making process, either by agencies or by Congress in Washington, D.C. on decisions that they that they work on and then hand down to us, if you will, at the state level. When I was a member of Congress and on the Energy and Commerce Committee, one of the things, we worked on a lot of things, but I remember very well, one of the things that we worked on but didn't have any expertise in was healthcare, and healthcare across the nation, and on how we could manage that. And Billy Tozen, who was the representative from Louisiana and the chairman of the committee, sought to call in several governors to say, well, what would work in your state? What do you think we ought to be able to do at the federal level to support what you want to do in your state? And so it was Governor Warner from Virginia and Governor Haley Barbour, I recall, were two of them that led that effort. They came and sat down in front of Congress and said, I've looked at the legislation and it's wrong. And believe it or not, we then took it upon ourselves and changed the total bill so that it fit what the governors wanted to do or what the governors should have more decision-making and how we could support them. And I see under Governor Herbert's leadership, that's one of the things that we can accomplish is through our legislative delegation, through the sheer force of 5 or 6 states, having a constant effort of being able to go to Washington, D.C., speak about the use of natural resources, the management of and the control of public lands and the assets on those public lands, which make up 81, what's yours? 8170, 65%, roughly 65% of the land mass of our states. A lot of decisions that are made that we simply do not get the opportunity to have the input in. And as a major stakeholder, and as one who's going to either suffer from or benefit from some of those solutions that come up in Washington, D.C., I just think we need to have more input in. But I do want to say in closing that I think Governor Herbert has done us all a great job in bringing us together. And if this is a demonstration of the leadership that I can expect as chairman of the Western Governors Association, all 19 Western states, then we can look forward to a great year next year. Thank you.
Let me join and thank you. It's great to be back in your state. As you know, my sister lives here in Salt Lake, my brother-in-law, and it's been a warm welcome. It's exciting to have you coming in as the new chair of WGA because, as you and I have talked for the last year or so, we do share not only borders, but we share a lot of common challenges and common opportunities. I think that is the good news story. We have a lot of opportunities working together, the Rocky Mountain States and Western Governors Association. The first suggestion I would make to you as the incoming chair is you got to get rid of this alphabetical order thing. Every meeting I'm last. Okay? So let's start there, and if you accomplish that, we'll be on the right track.
We'll just go in reverse order.
That's okay. Reverse order works. One of the, as has been mentioned, the public lands issue is a big issue. In Wyoming, we are the largest exporter of BTUs, about 10.7 quadrillion per year. Number 1 in coal reserves, number 2 in natural gas, number 1 in uranium reserves. And so energy is a very big issue for our state, not just because it's good for our state, but in fact we recognize the value in providing fuel for the country. But like the other states that are represented here, we also have a great care about the environment because tourism is a big industry. It's our second largest industry in our state. Our third largest industry is ag. And so the challenge for the Western governors, Republicans and Democrats alike, is how do we address those issues? How do we find the appropriate balance so that we have the energy we need, so we have the clean air, clean land that we must have, and how do we continue to focus on those things that build our communities, that makes our states strong. And because public lands are such a big part of the Western states, if you look at a map of the United States and you define it by colors, and we have a map that shows red where public land is, it almost starts at our border of Wyoming and then just continues to the west. And these create unique challenges for our Western states, and it's appropriate the Western Governors Association meets. And I think this subgroup that you have put together, Governor Herbert, is really going to be helpful because as we move forward, we have an opportunity to drive the agenda in terms of those things that are important to our states. Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado, he borders Wyoming as well. And we talk about water, we talk about energy, we talk about the environment, and how do we do these things. And so too often, because of our busy days, we show up to meetings and we don't have time to go through the things and put as much thought into it as we would like to. So you're proactively reaching out to the other Western governors and saying, here, what should be the issues we discuss? How do we address them? How do we find common ground? How do we make the best decisions possible? It's good. We want to have Western states, Republican and Democratic alike, to have as strong a voice and influence in this country as possible. And I think you're well on your way to doing that. Congratulations for your incoming chairmanship. Governor Otter, thank you for your past chairmanship. And you had an opportunity to change the alphabetical order. You missed that.
Wait a minute. H-O-M. Where'd you go to school?
Wyoming's Northwest.
Oh, I thought you were talking about last names. Bonnie, is that map up yet?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. If you take a look at that map, you'll see why we have a great nexus opportunity to work together.
With that, again, we'll certainly entertain questions for a few minutes. So, Alan, are you going to coordinate that, or are you just going to call?
Governor Mead addressed the balance between environmental concerns and those of developers moving forward. Yesterday, when you were meeting with Governor Jindal, you sort of indicated that the Obama administration had not been very friendly to Utah, when it comes to energy development and whatnot. It seems like there is a real divisiveness about this issue. Is there a middle ground that's acceptable to you? What is that middle ground? And are you convinced that if President Obama is reelected, that it can't be reached?
I'm an eternal optimist. I believe that we can reach the appropriate balance point. And we've had some successes in that effort. As you know, I created what's called the Balanced Resource Council, which was comprised of Republicans and Democrats, industry people as well as environmentalists, in trying to find that appropriate balance. So I think we've had some success there. We've had some concerns about some of the things that have been done with the current administration. The wildlands designation is one that was troublesome. We were blindsided on that. We had no advance notice. 2 days before Christmas, Congress had a session, and it was clearly an end around the Congress and trying to create something that sounded like wilderness, which only Congress can designate, and call it wildlands. So that's a concern. Concerns about the Arizona Strip and what's being done there. Concerns about dragging our feet on deciding on our RS-2477 roads and rights of way. Most of those should be able to be negotiated out. We've been trying to do that for a long period of time. And yet it just keeps drug out and drug out and drug out. And unfortunately for us, the evidence of these being real roads is dying off because of the age of the people involved in it. So, again, I'm optimistic that we can find positive common ground and a balance that's appropriate, no matter who occupies the White House. But we're just saying that's an issue, and we are going to be more assertive and more aggressive and more proactive in resolving that issue from a Utah perspective.
Question for the other
I was
governors.
going to say, can we let the other governors respond to the questions before we proceed to the next question? And then I want to remind the journalists present, please use one of the microphones. We're streaming this. And for these gentlemen and then our home states, we'd like to make sure their folks can hear what's going on and their media have access to it as well. So please ask your questions into the microphone.
Well, I think Jerry's made the specific reference to the situation in which your question went to. But I think we find more balance when we ask for more input. We're obligated as governors and the chief executive officer of our states that when we're going to make a decision relative to affecting the entire state, that we're going to go around and find the stakeholders and the people that, in order to make the right decision and a balanced decision, that we include all of them in it. When we have rules and regulations that are promulgated by an agency of the federal government that does not include the input from the governors, then I think there's a tremendous imbalance there. And I think that's the kind of balance that we're looking for. I think that's the kind of balance that Governor Mead was talking about. We certainly in Idaho enjoy a very robust tourism as part of our economy, and the tourist industry in Idaho is a big part of our economy. And we're proud of the fact that also that we have an environment that invites that kind of tourism. And to the extent that we've been able to be part of those decisions and making, we want to keep Idaho nice too.
I would just give one specific example. A lot of us, Republicans, Democrats alike, talk about states' rights. With states' rights comes state responsibility. With state responsibility comes state opportunity. What Wyoming did several years ago when my predecessor was in office, hydraulic fracturing has become a major technology for the exploration of gas and oil in the West and elsewhere. And as a result of that, we see natural gas prices dropping and dropping because there's an abundance based on this new technology. Wyoming said, we want to disclose what's in that hydraulic fracturing fluid. Wyoming moved forward with that. And yet, despite Wyoming taking that lead role, now we see the federal government saying, hey, this is something we need to control. The problem with that is, number one is, if you want states to do the responsible thing, if you want them to step up and say, hey, here's an opportunity for us to do this, if there's no merit in that because it's going to be a cookie cutter approach from Washington anyway, that is a disincentive for the states to provide that type of leadership. And so, yes, I think the question was whoever's president. What I say is, I think Western governors, regardless of the party, are committed to finding that balance. And I think one of the things Western governors can do, we certainly have disagreements with our people on the other side of the aisle, but I think what collectively we agree to is that governors can play a bigger role and should be invited to the table more often when these decisions are made out of Washington, D.C.
Governors, Utah's approach in dealing with public lands is to say demand that we have title to those lands and threat of lawsuit. Would you sign a bill demanding that the federal government turn over public lands to your states?
I'll take that on first. I'm casually aware of what Utah has done. I haven't looked through the legislation bit by bit, but I'm casually aware of what the process is. My Attorney General in Wyoming has taken a look at that. From my standpoint, I don't know what it would look like if Wyoming went that way. There's a lot of decisions I think that I would have to go through to reach that conclusion. How does it handle our parks, our forests? And then what is the cost-benefit analysis? I mean, if we're going to do that, does also not just the surface, but the mineral comes with it, because the minerals, of course, are important as well, because, the federal government not only owns a lot of land in Wyoming, they own a lot of the minerals as well as the surface. So from my standpoint, we have to jump through one, legally, what does that look like? We were a state in 1890. I think you were a little after us. Is that right, Governor?
1896.
1896. What was the state of the law then? Two, if we reach past that hurdle, what is the net benefit analysis, the costs associated with those, and then also what is the perception in terms of the public and when they come to Wyoming, are they going to be on public lands? Are these going to become deeded lands? So I know Governor Herbert and Utah has, I think, led the way on that. But from my standpoint, where I am now, I'm not sure that we would be interested in that or not. I just don't know enough about it.
As far as we're concerned in Idaho, we're kind of a business-oriented, business principle-oriented state. And so we got 35 million acres, roughly 14 million acres of BLM, another 20 million acres of 21 million acres of forest. And the cost versus benefit analysis would obviously be the first thing that we would want to take a look at. There was a time prior to the Carter administration in the 70s where the purpose of the federal government holding the lands were to hold the lands in a fiduciary trust for development and for divesting the federal government of those lands. But under the Carter administration, it was decided they weren't going to sell any more lands. So I think at a minimum, all the western states need to at least press the issue of the non-sale of those lands by saying, look, we were promised 5% of the proceeds of the sale of that 35 million acres in Idaho. So if you're not going to sell them, there's not going to be a 5% of a certain value. So we ought to be able to at least select 5% of the federal lands within the state, so that can become part of our economy as it was intended. And then the other issue, which we certainly would look at, is the equal footing doctrine. We became a state one day before Wyoming. The equal footing doctrines for Idaho, the Organic Act that was passed, Congress says that Idaho enters on an equal footing in all respects whatsoever with all the original states. Well, we're the 43rd state, so we look at 42 states, and some of those states have no federal land in them at all. But those that do have federal lands in them, and those that were granted certain endowment lands, some were granted. Idaho was granted 2 sections per township. There are other more favorable states, including the one we're in, that was granted double that. So we go to the equal footing doctrine. We go to the promises that were made, the 5% on the sale of all public lands within the state that would go to our endowment school system. And we say, at a minimum, let's at least keep the promises that were made. Gary?
Would you do that by legislation and threat of lawsuit, as Utah has done?
Well, I think we have an obligation to demand that they keep the promises, especially if it's at a cost to the state of Idaho.
So you would do it by legislation. You're willing to sign a bill like
Well, you could pass all the legislation in Idaho that you wanted, but if it's not going to be recognized by the courts and by Washington, D.C., and if the question comes to one of is our sovereign rights stronger than the supremacy of the laws of the United States, that's a whole different question.
Is what's the end goal today? Is something going to come out of this meeting that's going to go to Washington, D.C.? What's going to happen?
You know, from my perspective, as the one who called the meeting, I don't have any preconceived outcomes other than shared practices with each states that are border states, to talk about what are the issues unique to your state that are common to all here in the Intermountain West, and see if we can find, a united voice to have more and better impact on what policy is being created in Washington, D.C. So from my perspective, this is really a beginning. This is not an end. I expect we'll have regular opportunities to talk about these issues. We will have difference of opinion as far as what is the best way forward, but there's going to be some that we'll come together on. Water is a big issue for us here in Utah, as we are a very fast-growing state, and we share responsibilities. In fact, some of the same water from the Colorado River Compact. And not only is Colorado involved in this, and Wyoming and Utah, but Nevada has an issue there too. And so waters are going to be an issue we're going to have to work better together on, not only the conservation of, but the development of additional resources. Energy is one that's really for Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. It's a big part of our economy going forward, and we need to cooperate more in those 3 states. We have a basin out there. We call it the Uinta Basin, and whether it's western Colorado or southern Wyoming, that we need to have better collaboration and working together on. And that all interfaces with public lands, endangered species. We've had issues with wolves and some of our ranching and farming issues there. So we're kind of exploring ideas and issues and see where we can come together on and unite our voice going forward. That's going to take some time. That's not going to happen today. But we're going to understand some of the issues. But as we work better together through the Western Governors Association, I think we can unite voices and have a stronger united voice to help shape policy out of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I wouldn't add much to that. I don't see this today that we sign off on something that goes to Washington. I think this is just a starting point for this conversation. It's, other governors were invited who couldn't participate for different reasons, but, it's an opportunity for us to be proactive as governors. As said, Governor Hickenlooper, Governor Sandoval couldn't make it, but it's important for me individually because I get to hear from the other governors on the challenges they have, some of the successes they've had, and each governor brought some of their staff with them, and you get to hear their expertise as well on how they've dealt with issues. So great learning experience, number one, but more, I think equally important is how do we go forward, the Rocky Mountain Western governors, and have an influence.
My key expectation from the meeting today is to have the touchstones. If I've got a water issue that comes up in Idaho, it's going to be a lot more favorable for me to have 6 United States senators focused on that question than to have 2. So I can count on my 2 from Idaho to bring our points together for a water issue in Idaho. But if I can also count on the 2 from Wyoming and the 2 from Utah, that gives me a pretty good voice on a single issue. And it doesn't have to be just water, but it can be any other issue. And so I see a whole lot more effort of us combining together, even though it may not be the issue du jour for our state on that day. But if it affects one of my friends, eventually it affects me.
Dan, you had a question? Are you?
Go ahead.
Lisa? Oh, okay. All right. Lisa, I appreciate that.
Governor Herbert, you have a number of protesters outside the mansion today calling for public lands to stay in public hands. I want to know what message you would give to those protesters about their desire to keep those public lands from being sold or from being turned over in some other way. And if the other governors could address how big of an issue that is in their states as well. Thank you.
Well, I'd answer it this way. I don't think there's any desire that we have in Utah, and if you read the legislation, if we in fact cannot get the request, which was for the federal government to keep their promises that they made to us at statehood, which was to dispose of the land, and in exchange for that we say, well, then let us manage them. The legislation really is not conducive for us to sell them off. I know there's that accusation, but I think that's just more political rhetoric than reality. The fact of the matter is, if we sold them off, 95% of the proceeds goes to the federal government. So why would we be incented to sell them off? We would certainly be more incented to, in fact, lease properties out, as is currently being done, to keep public access, but allow for multiple use, as per the statutes of the BLM currently. I think the frustration for many in Utah is that what once was multiple use is now becoming just mostly only outdoor recreation, non-motorized, and an attempt from people outside of our borders to even create more non-motorized access to the public land. And so that's part of the frustration. There's concern of our farmers and ranchers, the loss of water rights and grazing rights and those kinds of things. So clearly in the legislation we have before us that's been signed, we've exempted out all the national parks, the 33 current wilderness areas, with an understanding that there needs to be some kind of group think from all stakeholders about what would be done with the remaining properties where we would maintain public access. We all know there are beautiful, pristine areas that need to be preserved and protected. We also all know that there's areas that ought to be developed, our natural resources and our energies. So our approach would be one of balance that would be appropriate for public access and maintain that, and yet have some heightened opportunity, not to sell off property, but to make sure that our industry folks have access in environmentally sensitive ways and being good stewards of the earth to access our energy.
Question for Governor Mead, if I might.
I think I at least attempted to answer that question, or I probably wouldn't have anything else to add. Thanks.
All right.
Endangered species was on your agenda here today. One area where Wyoming has been leading is in developing your plan to protect sage grouse. What now, in your experience, would you point out to Governor Herbert, Governor Otter, Governor Sandoval, who are all developing plans to protect the sage grouse? What, in your experience, is critical to the success of those plans?
Well, thanks for the question, and I compliment the other governors, Governor Sandoval, who's not here as well. Wyoming developed a plan to deal with sage grouse. The habitat is a big issue. And as we see rulings by federal judges, they say we can no longer manage endangered species by state boundary. And as a result of that, we recognize while the vast majority of sage grouse are currently located in Wyoming, it's a habitat issue. So we have reached out, and Secretary Salazar, to his credit, is providing leadership on this as well, Bob Abbey from the BLM. And we have asked, and I co-chair along with Governor Hickenlooper from Colorado, this committee that has reached out to these other western states where this is an issue and say, can we all do something collectively on this? Because if one or two states only manages this, there's still this danger that birds are going to get listed. It's in no one's advantage to have it listed. Where we want to be is that the habitat is such, the population is such, and the health is such that the bird is not listed. It's going to take a collective effort from many western states. And so that, you are correct, is one of the things that we talked about this morning briefly, is how do we work together on that. I think it can go broader than just this group, obviously, and it will go to the Western Governors Association. But we've made some progress on that, and we've heard from a couple of states today that they're already working towards it. Wyoming has volunteered the people that worked on it in Wyoming, and they have traveled to Utah, to Idaho, to Nevada to try to promote that. And it's a great example of the states being proactive to address a critical issue like endangered species.
I changed date and title, and that was about it on my executive order and following the lead of Governor Mead of Wyoming, because it worked so well. And we had seen it work once before in Idaho, because when Idaho put its roadless plan together, the former governor, Governor Risch, had called in all the stakeholders. They sat down at the table and they said, these are going to be the 5 categories of roadless that we're going to have, and 5 uses that we're going to have under our roadless plan. And when they submitted that, ours was the only one accepted in the United States. We think we can do the same thing and preclude a threatened or an endangered designation, which would then really could stop any kind of activity in the habitat of the sage hen. And one of the things that we're working on in Idaho is power corridors. We can produce a lot of power to the east of us from Wyoming and Montana, and to the north of us in Canada, that needs to come across to Idaho and then exit into Utah, Nevada, or head for California. But that's also in the habitat area of the sage hen. So a well-reasoned plan that's workable and necessarily preserves the habitat area for not only the use of the sage hen, but multiple use of mankind as well, is the end game. And I think, once again, efforts like we're making today are going to bring that to a reality.
No, I think Governor Mead really has taken the lead on this. We are trying to emulate in our habitat preservation for the sage grouse the process that's been done in Wyoming. So again, I think this is an example of good ideas that come from the states. And we think, in fact, believe that Washington ought to listen to the states more often. I know when we met with President Obama earlier this year, he talked about some of the best ideas in America have come from the states. Well, we say amen to that. We ought to be invited to give ideas, to be at the table and have discussion. We want to be partners with the federal government. We just don't like being the junior partner. We believe in the concept of federalism and this balance between a centralized government and the United States of America as we work together. We're going to work together as colleagues here in the Intermountain West and the Western Governors Association. We have ideas, we've got concerns, and we want to make sure that our partner in Washington, D.C. is listening to us and that we share and have a dialogue to find best practices and best ideas that are translated into best policy.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. These gentlemen have to get back to the table, so we can get on the slide sometime.
Governor, you mentioned yesterday that you guys would be discussing a little bit about immigration. So I'm wondering, what's been discussed so far, and other governors, just how much of a priority that is right now.
You know, Governor Hickenlooper wanted to bring that up, and because of his situation in Colorado, was not able to join us today, so I expected him to bring that up. So it wasn't really talked about. Obviously, it's been a big issue here in Utah, certainly a big issue in Arizona. We're going to be paying rapt attention to what happens with the court case of the Arizona law, and that will have impact on the law we've passed here in Utah, I expect, and give us some kind of an idea of whether our law will be held to be constitutional, which I think it will be, by the way. So it's an issue for a lot of our border states, Texas, Arizona, California, in the Western governors. I don't know about Colorado and Idaho. They can maybe answer that question if it's an issue for you guys.
Wyoming.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I guess Idaho is a border state.
Yeah, Idaho. Yeah, Oregon. What do you mean, Canada? Yeah. Well, I would tell you that we joined with Arizona. We joined as a friend of Arizona when they filed their lawsuit, and we're watching that court case amongst another one that is due to come. But just because we're not a border state, we still have a tremendous expense in our corrections, in our judicial system, in our education system, and in our health and welfare system. So we have a tremendous impact there. Using those same resources to take care of our own citizens would be a tremendous help to our own citizens. And it would help in all of those areas, whether it's education, health and welfare, or the criminal justice system. So we're interested in the outcome. We hope we find that Arizona succeeds.
Well, to answer the question, we haven't discussed it this morning until now. I think it's right for every governor of every state to be watching this. Legal immigration help make this country great, adds to richness to this country, and illegal immigration, I think, hurts legal immigration. I was a former U.S. attorney and assistant U.S. attorney, and so this was something that I dealt with often. And the fact of the matter is, I think the federal government's got a lot of work to do with regard to enforcement. What is a sound policy? So it's a challenge for the federal government to be sure, but it is also, I think, equally a challenge for all the states, whether they're a border state or not.
Thank you. I want to make sure that the media representatives here know that Governor Sandoval did phone in this morning and participate in the conversation about an hour and a half. Governor, do you want to add anything to this?
No, again, this is a beginning. This is not an end. I found it to be very productive. We have two great governors here that were able to join us in person. We have great governors in the West, and particularly in the Intermountain West. And I'm excited to be able to work with them on these issues that are unique to the West. These are not just great governors. They're great national figures that are actually doing significant things to impact policy here in the country. And I do believe that the governors are the best hope. Most people think that the nation is maybe going in the wrong direction. We need to turn it around. And I believe that governors have the opportunity to be a big factor in turning this country around in a positive direction. And no matter who's in the White House in this next election, and you know my preference is, of course, for Governor Romney, but regardless of who's there, governors will have an opportunity, I think, to impact positively the direction of this country. And I'm just honored to have Matt and Butch here with us today, and Brian to join us by telephone. And we hope to continue this conversation as we go forward. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Governor.